Welcome, everybody. This is the July edition of the MAIC webinar. As I was just saying, I can't believe it's already July. That seems crazy. I'm Maya from the Maine Aquaculture Innovation Center. And today I am very excited to have with us Christian Brayden from the Maine Aquaculture Association, and he will be presenting on how to create, build, and grow a sustainable aquaculture business in Maine. During the webinar, throughout the time, we're going to kind of do this as like interactive Q&A. You can use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we will try to ask those questions as they come up at like opportune times throughout this talk. And the more questions you ask, the more fun this is going to be for us. So keep that in mind. Make sure to put your questions into that box at the bottom of the screen. And I hope you enjoy this webinar with Christian. Take it away, Christian.
All right, will do. I'll pull up my slides first, which I know is everyone's favorite opening phrase. All right. Can anyone confirm that
You're
these
good.
are indeed working?
They are working.
Okay. Still good?
Still good.
Okay, great. So thank you all for the introduction, and thanks for those who are able to join today. I know I see some familiar names in there and some names I do not know, so great to see all of you on here. As Maya said, any questions, feel free to ask really at any point. If it's something I'll address, I'll probably get to it later, but be as interactive as you'd like to be. Glad to answer anything I can right up front. It also breaks up me talking to people for a long time, so I'm totally fine with that too. So again, thank you to the MAIC team for hosting this and inviting me to be here. So what we're looking at today is how to create, build, and grow a sustainable aquaculture business in Maine. So really looking at aquaculture businesses in Maine, what they are, and the various stages that people could be at. So that's how we have the three words here of whether it's creating or building a new one or just growing a sustainable aquaculture business in Maine, ways to do that and what it really means. So a little background on myself, if it lets me advance. So I have been the project manager at the Maine Aquaculture Association since 2017. Just a little bit of background on the Maine Aquaculture Association for those who don't know. We are, I am told, the nation's oldest state aquaculture association. We were founded in 1976, I believe. We're a nonprofit trade membership-based association, so we represent aquaculture in all of its shapes, forms, so on and so forth, at the local, national, regional, even international level, state level as well, of course. Doing lots of different work, often around advocacy. And as for myself, as a project manager, yes, I manage a lot of projects, but most of it is around this bottom bullet, economics of aquaculture. So that's a lot of what we're talking about today. So far, I've done a lot with, say, business planning, where I've met with over 90 people in order to talk to them about starting or growing their business. I've also done a lot of work around financial benchmarking for different types of aquaculture in Maine. We've created a financial resources manual. We've helped to create a crop insurance program and get people enrolled in that. So a lot on the economic side, sort of a hybrid between, I don't work for the university, but I'm not extension, but I'm kind of all those things in between as well. So there's that. And on the workforce development side, we are very proud to have worked with the Gulf Maine Research Institute and Educate Maine, SMCC, and the Department of Labor to, and many people on this call actually too, after many things, to create an apprenticeship program, a registered apprenticeship program for aquaculture in the state of Maine. So the two main areas of focus really here are looking at the economics of aquaculture, which obviously is covered through this business side of things, and the workforce development. As for myself, again, since 2017, I've been at MAA. My background is in resource economics, so that being said, more looking at natural resource economics, environmental economics, with really a focus on aquaculture. So I've been doing that since 2015. All right. I'm sorry, it's been finicky. There we go. So we talked about growing a sustainable aquaculture business in Maine. Just to start this, I think a question to be asked is, what is sustainability? And according to Investopedia, at least, it's the ability to maintain or support a process continuously over time. So it's something we've all heard. This image of flowery or leaf-inspired holly-looking windmills probably is indicative of what we normally think of when it comes to sustainability. So really the question I would encourage you to ask yourselves is sustainability, what does it mean? Because again, we're here to talk about sustainable aquaculture businesses. And based on the phrasing, that could mean a few different things. Oftentimes, what comes to mind for you, I'd like you to think of some sort of image, but what it often is, and for myself at least, when I hear this, is really an environmental focus. So in this case, this what appears to be probably a businessman shaking hands with figurative Mother Nature. Is this what a sustainable business is? There's a lot to unpack there, but is it just this environmental side that we're looking at? No, it's definitely a part of it, and you're not going to have a sustainable business without that, but that's not all it is. And oftentimes, and I'm guilty of this myself, the thinking stops right here. A sustainable business is one that's good for the environment. Sure, absolutely, it is. But what else really is a sustainable business? So one other aspect of it is the economic sustainability. And one thing I just want to touch on quickly, my pictures in here also borrow from agriculture a lot. Part of that is, again, my resource economics background looks a lot at things like forestry, fishing or marine resources, and agriculture. Agricultural economics really has been doing what we're trying to do in aquaculture for decades, much longer, really. But beyond the economics, I think there's something that we should keep in mind in aquaculture, in that aquaculture's been around for thousands of years, but agriculture has been really refining itself for much, much longer than that. And it's much more widely practiced across the globe. And there's a lot more resources that tend to go into it. So there's a lot to be learned from there. And arguably more stock images to borrow as well. So it goes in two directions there. So in terms of the economic sustainability, back to sustainability, things need to be economically feasible in order for them to be sustainable. So that means in the short run and the long run, you need to have enough cash flow to pay your bills, to pay your workers. But in the long run, you also need to be able to pay off any debts or anything like that. In the long term, that will be making you money. One thing I've heard someone ask, and I think this is still a job, is, if you have a family you're supporting, would you be better off being a greeter at Walmart instead of doing this? And again, I'm not even sure it's actually still a job, but the idea applies. So you don't want to be losing money. And if you are, you're just not going to be able to sustain that business. So in that sense, it's not sustainable. So again, we have this environmental aspect of sustainability, good for the environment, so on and so forth. It also has to be balanced economically in order for it to work. And last, you need this social aspect of sustainability as well. If you don't have that social support, you're just not going to be operational. It's not feasible. So in this case, we have a headline of Jonesport residents reject aquaculture moratorium. There's a lot of legalities around that we will not get into here, but you need a social license to operate. And the only way to operate in a public space, really, especially with something like leases where you are in public space or in public waters, without the social side of it, you're going to run into issues. It's just not going to work. So what it all comes down to when we talk about a sustainable business, it's not just, again, these sort of flowery windmill things of saving the earth or shaking hands with Mother Nature. It is a balance. So what this diagram shows in the middle, you do need to have all three. So when we're talking about sustainable aquaculture, it must fit this. Sometimes people think that sustainable aquaculture is just one particular type of aquaculture done in a particular type of way. And it could be, but just from an environmental point of view, that does not mean that it necessarily will be covering all of these bases. And if it's environmentally sustainable, well, if the social or economic aspect isn't there, it's not going to last, which is unfortunate, but it's the reality of it as well. So the balance is key. All three of these are very, very important. And without any one of them, you run into serious issues. This often is also called triple bottom line, where you're looking at the social, environmental, and economic impacts of things. You see in a lot of different things like B Corps, for example, using that. But again, people don't just focus, or please don't focus on just the environmental aspect. Again, sustainable aquaculture businesses. It's not just sustainable aquaculture from an environmental perspective, it's sustainable aquaculture and sustainable businesses that cover all three of these. I know I'm really harping on this, but I think it's really important because it's really easy to be overly focused on the environmental aspect again. So what some people may be wondering then is, all right, so that's a sustainable aquaculture business, but what really is a sustainable aquaculture business? Well, it could be this, is a sustainable aquaculture business, is it just working on the water? Is it farming? I can tell you when someone asks me about an aquaculture business, this is what comes to mind. Um, it then begs the question of the idea sort of a farm versus a business. And it also depends. As any economist would answer any question ever, it depends. It depends what your role is. Are you the farm owner? Are you working on the farm? Are you trying to start the farm? Are you trying to sell the farm? Whatever the role is, it could be different. But there are many parts to this, many sides to it. So working on the water, is this an aquaculture business? It could be. Working in the office, is this an aquaculture business? It could be. It's definitely an important part of it. Um, this isn't necessarily business, in this, especially in this case, an aquaculture business. It's office work, but this could be a necessary part of it too. Again, this could be somebody's role in a business just working on the office side or working on the water. So when it comes to what an aquaculture business is, well, it's both. It's working on the water and it's working in the office. And it's, I think, really important to highlight this because we often focus a lot on one or the other, but really both go together. For example, on the business side of things, I often tend to work on more of the office side. But if the office side isn't communicating with the water side, or things from the office aren't being applied to the water, or things learned on the water aren't being applied to the office, it's really troubling and it's very difficult to make things work right. So this really requires both. And another side of this too is looking at career growth. Because yes, many people are looking to start or grow their own business, but there's a really growing part of the sector of just people coming in here who want to make a career working in aquaculture. They may not want to be the business owners themselves or running the companies, but they want to make a career in it. And so the career growth in aquaculture does often involve a combination of these things. And I would argue the best office workers have that experience on the water. And in fact, things like our apprenticeship program, it's exactly what we're trying to do. And I've heard an anecdote of one of the, and I think it's one of the, I forget his name, but one of the heads of one of the salmon companies internationally, one of the larger firms in the world, started off as, I think it was an apprentice in Norway, scrubbing the bottom of rotten fish barrels. That's how he started. And he showed up work every day, did his job, and he learned many other things aside from how to scrub the bottom of fish barrels. But throughout that, over the course of his career, he's now reached basically the pinnacle of it and is helping to manage one of the largest salmon farms in the world. So it's often a combination, sort of an arc over time, where it can go from on the water work to office work and vice versa. Sometimes people have a foot in both worlds here, but this is what makes up a business. There is the farm side, there is the office side, but a business is really both of these together. And it can be really challenging to manage both the farm and the business, especially for one person. So that's something I think to keep in mind too, for especially those of you who are owners who are doing both. It's really hard because this isn't showing someone driving oysters or mussels or whatever it is that you may be growing to restaurants or to pick up supplies, so on and so forth. I worked on farms, terrestrial farms, such for many years, and I can think of times of the owners having to, go do things and me being left in a hayfield in the summer for hours. And, I don't blame the owner for that. It's just how it happens. And then they forget to do the books and you have to remind them to pay you. I get it. It happens. But it's very challenging, and this makes up a business, and that's what is so challenging about running a business. One thing I do want to highlight though, too, going a little bit beyond this, and I promise I will get to specifically how to grow or start your sustainable aquaculture business. But Another thing to remember is that we're not just focused on food here. Sure, in Maine, we're typically looking at, shellfish, finfish, seaweed, things that are usually, at least the vast majority, going to human consumption. Some may be going to other things like animal feed, things like that. And Noah has some great graphics on that, really breaks down different ways that aquaculture products and other seafood products or marine products are being used. But it's not just food either. So one example I have here is Anderson Minnow Farm in Arkansas. This is bait fish and sport fish. I don't know the impact of their one farm, but I think you would be blown away by the amount of jobs and income, not for the owners. They're great people, but not for them, but for the people in their local community. This is rural Arkansas. There is not a lot going on. He paints a pretty bleak picture of the area, despite the fact that he loves it and continues to live there. And they've had to do a lot working the workforce development side there and to get people to learn to work on the farms and attract people even from other areas sometimes. And they're paying pretty decent money to keep them there too. But I want to bring that up because when I was told about aquaculture, I never would have thought of a minnow farm. And I mean, there are a lot of restrictions in Maine around that with fishing. That's a different story. But regardless, these things are still multi-million dollar businesses. It may not look it, but this is a farm and it's another way of doing it. I don't actually know if there's any bait fish and sport fish still being raised in Maine. There were, I'm not 100% sure now. But another side too is looking at Mi'kmaq farms, for example, where them amongst other people in the state are producing trout. And these trout could be for food consumption. In fact, sometimes you can get some of their brook trout in the store. But they're doing a lot for stocking too. The rainbow trout in here, for example, is not theirs. It's another farm out of, I think it's Gray. And people are doing this to stock their ponds. Even from the state perspective, I forget how many millions of dollars are going into hatchery fish per year. Some are going towards conservation efforts like Atlantic salmon, but some are just going to people who want to get out and fish. In many cases, it's put and take, and does end up being food on the table for someone, but it's still aquaculture. And again, it's not necessarily a food sense. It's looking more at um, tourism and outdoor recreation and such. So again, aquaculture is often food in Maine, but it can be more than that. And also in the same business, it can be more than that. For example, with the Mi'kmaq Farms, where they do sell this as a food product, they also sell it for stocking. And you can make a fair bit of money doing either one. But there are other aspects to consider, again, before I really dive into the details. Tourism is another example. For some people, this is their aquaculture business. Some people have tourism businesses strictly based around aquaculture. Some have tourism businesses that also include aquaculture. A lot of different aspects of this and sort of combinations that can take place. For some people, it also is a part of their oyster business, for example, or mussel or whatever it may be, where they're running tours. So again, you have the on the water production, you have the in the office work, but there are often other parts to it, whether it's food or not. It could be the tourism, it could be that you're doing catering, something like that. These are all aspects to consider, and all of them too within that diagram of the balance of sustainability. Does doing tours perhaps help with the social sustainability side? Okay, well that could then be a necessary thing, even if it may not make you a ton of money or may not lose you too much money. It's all a balance, and these things can really play off one another in ways that can help you or work against you. If you're doing tours, and when you're doing tours, that means you can't harvest your product and you're not making any money on the tours, and people don't like you or you upset someone, then it's not going to work in your favor. So these are all things to consider too. This can work for you, it can work against you. And you have to consider these things as separate parts of your own business as well. But again, some people do these other parts of aquaculture businesses that are not the production, and there's other businesses that support aquaculture or are related to aquaculture. River Tripper in Damariscotta is a great example where they cruise up and down the Damariscotta, sometimes stopping at farms, serving oysters, serving drinks. Scenic cruise, you get to look at seals and eat really delicious things and have a great time on the water. And that's a big part of their business. And there are other options like that too across the state. But to get back more to the nitty-gritty of a farm itself, is every farm a business? This is a question I've been asked, and I often ask myself. The question I would ask you is if you came across this, and we'll say it's just this one raised bed in someone's backyard. I can tell you I have one in my backyard and it looks actually a lot worse, but that's a different story. Am I a farmer or would you call me a gardener? Um, I would argue garden is probably a stretch, but I'm definitely not a farmer. You know, what I have in my backyard, it feeds the backyard groundhog and nothing else right now. So I'm definitely not a farmer. Um, if I were selling this, could I technically be a farmer? Yeah. Um, but it's more of a hobby. It's something, to do on the side. Everything's welcome and encouraged. And just for a difference here, this is a potato farm in Maine in Blossom. That is not a hobby. You're not doing that without some serious equipment, serious amount of land. Again, the social license to be operating, the legal license to be operating there too. This is someone's profession. There's someone who is doing this likely as their entire full-time job. And other people who are there doing a lot of work with them too. They used to have the potato harvest even with the school kids involved. I'm sure some still are. But in this case, again, I just have these two pictures up showing places in Maine where you have sort of a farm versus a business. Someone who is farming because they want to and something they like to do versus someone who may feel the same way, but also is in it to make money. Probably because they need to make money. When you're investing that much money too, you're often supporting not just yourself, but a family and trying to make that work, really is where the business side comes in. But again, all of these are encouraged. There's no shame or guilt or anything like that being thrown at any one of these. It all is what works for you. What works for you and your family. That's what matters the most. So what does an aquaculture business do? At its core, it's really quite simple. And this is where we get to sort of farm versus business. Again, farm can be someone who's growing stuff in their backyard or whatever it may be for their own personal consumption. When it comes to a business, all you're doing is you're taking a product. You're raising this, in this case, a product, or it could be a service. Again, talking about, say, tourism, things like that. This is sort of the economics 101 version of aquaculture. You're taking this product and then converting it into money. There's, of course, much more to it, but this is really the core. An aquaculture business is converting a product into money. Of course, as I said, there's a lot more to it, but this really is it. So again, it's where we go from farm to business, where yes, an aquaculture farm that is business does still have a farm aspect, but it is a business at the end of the day. And really the most successful people are those who manage it as a business, not just a farm. And it's really a big shift in the way of thinking and sort of a larger commentary on the sector. And part of the reason we got into this business planning side and such is there's not a lot of thinking going on in that direction. It was more, well, I have a farm and I could ask people, some people who have been, honestly, I'd say doing this for quite some time and seem to be quite successful. And I could ask them, oh, did you turn a profit last year? They often don't know. I mean, yes, they have books on it, but there's oftentimes not much more to it than that, and especially a plan going forward, just kind of well, we'll figure it out next year. And really the shift in thinking is that as this becomes an increasingly competitive sector, and it's not just for oysters, it's all aquaculture in general, and more sophisticated, there's really this arc that goes on of business development over time. And it's not just those who are necessarily, good at the research side or good at the growing side. It's obviously important, but it's really those who manage their farms as a business and those who manage that business well. That's really going to be the big difference. So again, this is the core of it. But for you, how do you know what to do? I'm sure at this point, some of you are thinking, hello, what about me? How do I start a business? How do I grow my business? How do I improve it? How do I succeed now for the foreseeable future? How is this applicable to me? And we will get into that because as I recently learned as a musical, how to succeed in business without really trying. This is our focus, except you will have to try. I partially put this up here because it is a musical comedy. I have not actually read or watched this. I know it's been out for quite some time. I think it was written in the 60s. So glad to take anyone's review if they would like. But the point is, it is a musical comedy because it's satire. How to succeed in business without really trying. You're going to have to try. It will take hard work. However, one thing I do want to highlight, and because I've seen this happen, is don't be a hero. Um, Things can be done in a calculated way. Not saying it won't be hard, but I just want to highlight that things don't have to be done explicitly at the expense of your body, your mental health, your bank account, relationships, etc. Um, it would be great if you can succeed without really trying. If you can, honestly, good on you. Please write the book for us. But it is really easy, especially, in Maine, the sort of rugged individualism of figure it out on your own, work hard, and sort of keep your head down and get it done. That's great. And it really is wonderful and truly an impressive thing about Maine. But I've also seen people whose bodies are figuratively broken by the time that, they're in their 40s or 50s. People who have drained all of their bank account and savings, and people who have made some really complicated relationships because of things that did or didn't work out on the farm or things that didn't go the way they thought they would. It can get really complicated and really ugly and ultimately affect your quality of life. And whatever it is you're doing in aquaculture business, you are doing it, I'm sure, at least in part, because there is a love for working on the water, keeping that tradition, whether in yourself or in your family. But it's because you love that life. And if any of these things go wrong, whether it's again your body, you have no money to cover expenses, or you've tarnished relationships, it's really, really difficult to not have that affect your quality of life. And that's part of why you're doing this as well. And I'm not going to say that there won't be good days and bad days. But again, really focusing on succeeding without trying too hard and really reaching out to resources and those who are there to help as well. And there's an ever-growing network of that too. So again, hello, what about me? No, I have not forgotten. Back to you. How do we actually do this? Well, an overview really is looking at these four main steps, and there's of course much more to it than this. And ultimately, if anyone ever wants to talk, please feel free to sign up for a meeting with me, and I'm glad to go through this. I've done this, like I said, with I think over 90 people at this point. Some people have gone on and done really, really well with their business, not exclusively because of me, to be very clear. But I'm there to help. And other people I've talked to, and they want to, start a farm and they want to save the world with it. And after I talk to them more, and they're from halfway across the country, they've never been on a boat, they have no experience on the water, and they don't like the cold, we learned that actually starting a farm may not be the best for them in the middle of winter in Maine. And I think that's just as important of a lesson to learn for that person, but also for whoever else is involved in their life, maybe their family and friends. But that also keeps people honest, and it prevents having any sort of negative reputations or experiences with aquaculture in Maine as well. As you know, that social side is really important. It's something we see a lot of challenges with. People are tough. It's really tough to kill, or it's, I don't know where I was going with that. Really tough to deal with oysters and such all the time, or mussels or seaweed, whatever it may be. But I would think many would argue it's harder to deal with the people around that. So the steps of success here really break down these four categories of goal setting, production planning, business planning, and an annual or more frequent review really of how things are going for you. Again, there's much more to it than this, but we'll start at the top. And this really is oftentimes the most important thing. And if it's all you take away from it is goal setting, that's great. So, goals. What about them? Well, as I just said, they're probably the most important step in aquaculture, in running a sustainable aquaculture business, because what matters most is, what are your goals? What are your goals for your farm's business? Some are big, some are small. Is it what you want the farm to be? Or is it the specific thing you want to grow, or a specific place you want to be? What's your role in it? Do you want to grow to be the manager of a bunch of employees? Do you want to be the only person working on it? What's your family's role in it? Are you going to have your family working on it, your kids on it as soon as you can? Maybe some cousins or whoever may be helping, or does nobody want anything to do with it? Um, what is the role this plays in your life? Is this something that you want to be a hobby on the side? And again, it can be a hobby where it's technically a business too, and you just don't really want to lose money. You can still sell some product just to try to cover your costs. That's great. If that's what you want to do, perfect. If you want in 5 years to quit your full-time job, your day job, and to run your farm as your business and pay yourself, that's a very different plan you're looking at ahead. But looking at the time you want to put into this, the size you want it to be, the number of employees, so on and so forth, these are goals that are crucial to try to figure out as you go forward. So when it gets to the goal setting itself, again, here these are just written down. What do you want? What do you want for you, for your business, and as I said as well, for your family? What's your timeline? So what do you want for you in a year? What do you want for you in 5 years? Same thing for your business. Month by month, year by year, it's really important. Another thing is looking at the goal of how much product do you want to grow? And this gets a little ahead of itself, but how much product will you need to grow? Because those don't always line up. And that's where we get more into the business planning side of it. But the most important I'll highlight for right now is all this minus that, where it's what you want to do and what your timeline is. That's the most important. This is why you're doing this. Um, so when it comes to setting goals, what we just talked about again, what's for you and your family and what you want to grow, write them down. I cannot emphasize this enough. Write them down. I have truly seen families ripped apart to the point where they can barely be in the same room as each other because they were super excited and started a farm together and things didn't go as planned. Not to say things aren't going well, even. By many metrics, you could argue they're going great, but two people could have different ideas. And if it's not written down and agreed upon, those things can shift over time where those ideas can drift in one way or the other. People can drift in opposite directions and want opposite things, even though they started at the same place, but they don't remember. And then it can really get ugly. So writing them down is the way for everyone to be anchored on that exact same thing. Then you discuss them with your partners, whether it's business partners or your family, friends, whoever is involved in this or potentially involved with this. So again, this is where the personal relationships and money and such can become really tricky. When it's written down, it also makes it really easier if sometimes someone wants to be bought out of it or wants to get out of it, it doesn't work for them. That can be awesome. If that's just how it works or somebody has something else come up in life, so be it. The more explicitly it's spelled out, the easier it will be. The easier it'll be for you, for the business, and for these relationships too. Maine is a very small state, and aquaculture is even smaller beyond that. So the last thing you want to do too is really burn any bridges. So this keeps things clean. It keeps things easy. I know nobody wants to get into aquaculture for record keeping. You're writing down legal documents, but you can scribble this on the back of a wet cocktail napkin. As long as somebody hold on to it, it will go a very, very long way. You can also refer
Christian,
back to it.
I have a quick question there, actually. I just
Yeah.
wanted to jump in. So you said it can be scribbled on the back of a cocktail napkin. At what point is it necessary for some of these goals to be like actually written as legal documents?
Um, I should start by saying I cannot provide legal advice.
Okay.
Uh,
That's fair.
it really depends, I would say. It's tough. I don't have a great answer for that question in all honesty. Aside from as long as it's, agreed upon up front, I think it depends what you want it to be. So that's sort of between you and your partners in that. Some people are very explicit about that up front, and they have a written agreement when they make their LLC that this is what our intentions are. But other people just have more of an too loose of an understanding. But if it's written down, sort of the in between, it's at
Gotcha.
least agreed upon. People can refer back to it, and in
Yeah.
that case, I'm guessing again, don't know, could probably be legally binding. I'm sure probably some people in the attendees here could answer this better than I could. Um, but yeah, it's a great question.
Okay, thanks. Sorry to derail you a tiny bit there. Keep going.
No, no, it gives me room for something that I need to learn now too. And in fact, we just received a grant looking at succession and transition planning around aquaculture farming, where I just recently started it. So that's something we're looking at too, and that's going to be a huge part of it as well. Looking at, from start to finish, people selling a business or giving it to the next generation, the legalities around that. So I have a lot to learn as well.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. So another thing beyond the goals, I know I talked about this, but I want to give sort of some visuals to different size of operations. In this case, I specifically chose agriculture because I didn't want to call out any aquaculture people in Maine, or any other associations with aquaculture. So it really depends what you want. And again, these are all totally acceptable. Whatever that works for you, great. Do you want a tiny farm stand, where you just are selling oysters? That's great. If that's what you want, perfect. Then you know exactly what you want. Um, you could perhaps want somewhere that's larger, where you want a farm stand where you can hang out with your friends. Sure. If you want a place where you can get your friends out on the water and have a good time, awesome. If you want to try to not lose money doing it, perfect. If that's what works for you, that is great. Is it a side business, something you want to just do, in the summer? Or is it something that you're looking for more full-time employment? Do you want your own shop? Do you want your own warehouse or something? Or do you want to be doing your own distribution? And this all really is what you want. And in fact, actually, I'll say the one on the left is my friend's family's farm. And they're a great example, again, leaning on agriculture, of looking at how to grow your business. As you can see here, you can see they have some corn and some pumpkins. They're a vegetable farm, but they never were before. For the longest time, they were a dairy. And for, I think, 56, no longer than that, at least half a century, they were a dairy. And what happens, and this is where the business planning comes in, I'm getting a little ahead of myself, was the dairy cows cost them too much. And they only had about 100 head of cattle, I believe, or they're only milking 100 head. And it was too small of a scale to break even. There were shifts in the distribution chain, a supply chain for dairy. And based on those shifts, they weren't able to make the money at the scale they had. And that's where they wanted to operate. That was the room they had to operate. So they had to get out of it. They didn't know what to do. And they assessed a bunch of different options, did a bunch of plans and tried to figure out what would work, and then converted a bunch of their former pasture land to vegetable farming. And now they're moving forward each year and expanding. They went from, I think they dragged a shed out of the backwoods, and that was their original farm stand or something like that. I don't know what it was before, right in front of their house. And then now they built this, this is right on Route 1 where people are driving by all the time. The point being, they're, as far as I know, at least doing great now, and they're slowly expanding each year. But it's only because they realized things weren't working for them. It wasn't meeting their goals. It wasn't what they wanted to do. And it just wasn't working financially. So their planning really is what changed everything for them. And they, switched species entirely. They went from livestock to vegetables. And I'm not saying that you should stop your aquaculture operation to grow vegetables unless you really want to. But in any case, it's really this analysis, from a year-to-year basis and planning forward, that makes the difference. And again, they're super happy now with what it is they're going on. Their whole family's working on the farm, or those who want to be are working on the farm, and it works for them. So just an example to keep in mind, I think, for aquaculture farms as well. But getting ahead of myself there, for the recap of the goal setting, I truly cannot emphasize this enough. Write them down. Gets everyone on the same page. Again, as I said, I've seen families torn apart over this because nobody wrote it down, or even if they did, they didn't really agree to it. So those are really important things. And again, Maya's question about the legalities is a great one. So be as formal as you want and feel comfortable with, I would say, and it'll make it easier in the long run. But the goal setting recap just really does boil down to write them down. Seriously, just do it. Just write them down. Okay, moving on to the next, production planning. So after writing down the goals, how do you achieve them? This is sort of the bread and butter of the business, I would say. Where are you today? Where do you want to go? How do you get there? Seems pretty straightforward. Let's say, for example, you want to grow 1 million pounds of mussels next year. All right, well, what do you need this year? Gets a little more complicated. But, do you want to quit your day job tomorrow or in 5 years? That's going to make a big difference in what your planning is. So production planning is, and forgive me again for using oysters as an example, is planning this all out. It's what drives your farm. It's really the schedule behind the production on your farm and growing it. So again, it's taking those goals you have that are written down, and maybe it's you want to be full-time on the farm, employing yourself and three others in 5 years. Great. Let's say that's oysters. And in order to do that, you need to grow 250,000 oysters. Cool. That's awesome. Well, how many oysters are you going to need now? Okay, well, it's going to take 3 years to grow most of them, but what about the ones you already have? Okay, so let's say 3 years from now you want to quit your job. So how many oysters do you need to buy now in order to have 250,000 in 3 years? Okay, maybe you come up with that number. Well, then how many cages and bags do you need? Okay, great. That's more than you can fit on 4 LPAs. When are you applying for a lease? That might take 2 to 3 years. This is where the production planning really is crucial, and oftentimes where a lot of mistakes can happen, because especially with leases taking, a few years, if you don't have that space, you can't grow into it. And if you don't have that space, you're looking at potentially, let's say with a 3 year product, 6 years, 3 years to get that lease, and then 3 years once you have that lease to get that first year class in sometimes. So you can be looking at 6 years. So production planning is really huge in meeting your goals. You take your goals and sort of work backwards of this is what I want by this point. What do I do today, tomorrow, next month, later this year? And it helps you figure out that farm size, your sales goals, labor and equipment costs, and capital needs. And that's a little more on the business planning side. But the production drives your business timeline and investment, because nobody's going to look at this application process on the left and say that looks quick and easy, because it's not. Many of you have gone through it. You know it's not. Gear. There's a lot of gear that can be involved. And the production plan determines the size of your farm, and again, what you'll need in terms of the gear, then also the investment and the time to reach that size. So what really is a production plan? Conveniently for you all, we have created them in conjunction with Focus Maine, USDA, NIFA, and others, and can help provide customizable growth projections for free. You really just have to talk to me. We have it set up now that I can pretty quickly get this customized to you, your farm, your growth cycles, so on and so forth. And I would argue even more importantly, we can also do it for those of you who don't have anything in the water yet. So we can show what it's going to look like over time. This also helps plan out different sort of, say, leases where you're looking at different growth rates. And we have this for oysters, mussels, scallops, and seaweed. But the big thing too is it helps you manage your future inventory. So this is how you're going to make sure that you're going to meet that goal of product you need in 3 years. But also make sure you're going to have enough this year too, because it's easy to look 3 years in the future then and forget about how much you need this year to meet those sales goals you want. And through that nature, it also helps to improve your business planning accuracy. Because once you know the number of animals going through your farm in a given year over time, in a given year and over time, it helps you to figure out the costs associated with that, and really where you are making money or not making money. So what is a production schedule? This is a little closer up. The two things you really got to focus on here, want to focus on here, is how much seed do you buy? So that's what we're looking at on the left. And then what is your end of year market size inventory? So that means end of the year, based on your sales goals, how much are you going to have left at the end of the year? And the way this is designed, if it's negative, it's going to come up red, and you're going to see, oh no, in 2028, I'm going to be way in the red. That means that in 2024, I need to buy twice as much seed. And this allows you to adjust the seed, and it shows you how it's going to trickle throughout your farm over time. So it's really, really crucial to making sure you at least have an idea of what works based on your mortality. That's on the next slide here. Your inventory, your sales goals, and your mortality rate. So those three things are driving all this on your farm. And of course, there are events that happen. And really, this is where also that actual comes in, that last step where you're comparing the production and the projected versus what actually happens, because mortality events happen. So tracking that over time and seeing what should be happening versus what is happening.
Christian, I have another question.
Yeah.
Um, So when you were building these models, what were you basing the numbers for the mortality? I assume it's like a percentage or something, like a scaling factor. What were you basing that on?
It is, yeah, it's really tough. Kind of funny again, where pretty much all of the stuff that I have built and others have built in aquaculture is actually based off of agriculture, mostly livestock. I
Hmm.
think this was based off of a cattle livestock plan from Texas originally. Different mortality rates, but to answer your question more directly, the benchmarking work we did was we found such variable mortality rates that we couldn't really assign anything because the variability looking at 1 year's snapshot was just too high. It could be anywhere from 2% to 90% mortality. So you never know. We have it set on a toggle now, so it's coded that I can just switch it as a drop down.
Mm.
And I talk with people if they have an idea. I get a lot of people I talk to are about a year or two into their farming and say, I just got my first product. What do I do? And they have an idea of mortality rate at least. So we can go from there.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I like
And
it.
if not, we'll assign a rate based on the area and sort of a general understanding of that area and growth curve and mortality. And in fact, the growth curve came from Chris Davis's PhD study.
Chris Davis, for anyone who doesn't know this, is the director of MAIC. So
Yeah.
awesome. Thank you for answering that. That's really interesting. I'm fascinated by the models. So very
Yeah,
cool.
glad to talk to them with anyone. And in terms of this production planning, I understand it's not what people want to do. This is not why you want to get into farming. But this, even if, again, you just stick with the goals, great. But if you stop at the production planning, this does so much for you. This will basically lay out your future on the farm for the next foreseeable future or next foreseeable 10 years. But if you don't want to plan, and this is just honest, please refer to this book, which is an actual book of This Farm is a Mess. You'll run into issues with yourself, with DMR, not putting DMR at fault here, just saying that you're going to not have enough room for what you need. And you don't want to run into that. It's bad for the product. It's not going to be good for you. It's just going to be stressful. It will suck. Just do some of the planning. And frankly, this is what makes or breaks a lot of farms and businesses at that, where people aren't planning. They're just kind of winging it year by year. And if you're not planning, you're not going to meet your goals. Sometimes you get lucky for a while. But again, remember, this is not just a farm. So how do you plan your business? So we're at step number 3 now, business planning. Um, it's really, you create a production plan. This is what you will do to meet your goals from a production standpoint. Now the question is, will it make money? Now, later, how much? There are different options that might make sense. Most people I've talked to, this is the business plan I see. They hope for the best. There's a little more to it than that, but I've honestly seen worse too. It won't let you grow how you want, at the speed you want. You're unlikely to achieve your goals. It might work, but again, it's going to be chaotic and stressful and just a mess on your farm and in your life. So, how do you prepare a business plan? To greatly oversimplify it here, think it out, write it down, seek resources. So, how do you grow your farm? Really, what you're doing is assigning costs and income to each step of the production plan. So, you're looking at each year and the levels of production you're expecting to need and figuring out the costs and the revenues associated with that. It's a necessary part of the growth, both internally and externally, because maybe you'll find you need financing, maybe you don't. But it doesn't have to be complicated. Work with someone on it, discuss it with your family. I really highlight the work with someone on it. I saw, for example, I know Nick Branchina's on here. Coastal Enterprises Incorporated, they do a bunch of work around this too. SCORE does as well, and we do at MAA too. Really reach out to someone. Don't just suffer on your own. It makes it a lot easier. We've worked with a lot of people. It will make everyone's lives easier. So, at a really high level, without getting into it, a business plan, you're often looking at trying to make a 5-year budget projection. So really figuring out, and it's intentionally illegibly small, your operating cost, your fixed costs, and your income, your revenue. Are you turning a profit? Will you over 5 years? And then one thing I really recommend in our tools, for example, break it down is a per unit cost. I am blown away sometimes when I work with people to see the per unit cost of, say, part-time labor or zip ties. It's random things. You never know on a given farm what it'll be, but they can have profound impacts on the bottom line for people and really could make or break a business. So this shows the costs on a per unit, whether it's per pound, per oyster, per whatever it is basis. And last is the business plans help to really bring forth your cash flow, which again, the cash flow is just figuring out how much money you have at the end of the month, essentially. Are you gonna be able to pay the bills, pay your workers? Because if you're not gonna have the cash flow, you're gonna have serious issues. And some people, yeah, need some money in that 3-year gap between, or 2 or 3 year gap for shellfish you often see, of putting the product in the water and having a market size. Sometimes you need help there, and that can be fine. Sensitivity analysis is another part that helps you figure out how different mortality rates or different prices on your product can impact the farm. And last, what I want to highlight here is a break-even analysis. So this is really important, especially for those of you in the just starting or growing farm stage. What this does helps you figure out at what point of production will I break even based on my current cost structure. And so that's where the production planning and business planning work together. Because that helps you find, I need to grow X amount of mussels, X amount of seaweed in order to make it make money for me. And then the production planning, of course, is how to get there. And business planning is, okay, how do we get the money to get there? And all this helps to identify any other red flags too. Last to highlight on this is the annual review. It's really pretty straightforward, just assessing how you're doing versus your plan. Make adjustments and take action. So you're just assessing, as I said, the performance versus the projected, identifying strengths, areas for improvement. This is really where strides can be made, and where business saving realizations and decisions can be made. You can do it more than annually. I also suggest speaking with and learning from all employees. If you're the owner and you're usually doing owner stuff that's not on the farm, talk with all the employees. They know what's going on from the ground level, water level up. And there's so much to be learned there. So really make sure you talk with everyone. And last, take action, adjust your plan as needed once you see where things are going well or not, and consult resources. And the last thing I really want to cover here is the resources. So please use these resources, not just myself, but everyone who's around the state, and many more people than I listed on this slide. For example, the Maine Aquaculture Association, we have the production and the business planning, like I've shown you. Other things like financial benchmarking show you the averages across the sector, so you can see where you are doing well or not doing well compared to the sector. Financing Resources Manual will help you with different places where you can try to find options for financing. And there's much more, including a QR code where you can just sign up for a meeting with me. Glad to talk you through and direct you to the right resources, whoever makes the most sense. Coastal Enterprises, as I mentioned, they also do some of this work and have a seed farm loan, for example. SCORE also offers business consulting on a free basis. What these all are here to say too is others have been through it before. We're here to help. Learn from other people's mistakes. Don't just make them on your own. You, of course, have to learn your own lessons, but try to learn from other people too and build on what they've learned. Don't make it harder than it needs to be. And again, here's just the meeting code, bigger in case the first one didn't work, where again, these farm goals and the production business plan is really I guess you say the bread and butter of this all. So again, want to highlight the steps of success, and it's really the goal setting where you're figuring out what it is you want, writing that down, coming up with a plan of how to get there from a production standpoint. From a business standpoint, figuring out if it's feasible, and if it's not, what adjustments can you make? And then how does that adjust to your goals and your production plan? And once you get something that on paper works, great. If you want to go for it, go for it. But doing this all on paper too saves you the time and the hassle of, you could try a new method for growing your product and financially it may not work. You could have tried that on paper potentially and figured that out before you bought the gear and spent 3 years wasting your time and learning that lesson. Of course, there are risks to take, and it's always a balance of risk and reward. But this allows you to do a lot of adjustments on paper, and see the different impacts it'll have on your farm, whether it's growth rates, or size of lease, so on and so forth. And last, just the annual review, at least annually, where you're analyzing your plan and looking for areas for improvement and find ways to take action, and move your business forward. And with that, I'll conclude and think hopefully I have just a couple minutes for questions. And yeah, feel free to scan the meeting QR code. But if there are any questions, I'm glad to take them now. And if we run out of time, I'm glad to talk with any of you after the fact as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Christian. I'm just gonna stop your screen sharing if that's okay, so that
Yep.
we're all on screen here. Um, we have 3 minutes, so if anyone does have a question, please put it in the chat. I'll just say that was a very useful and also entertaining presentation, so I thoroughly enjoyed it. Um, does anyone on screen have a question they want to ask?
No questions, but that was great, Christian. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I like the way that you outlined the setup because I think it's very applicable across other things as well, not just business.
The setup in what sense?
The setup of like what do you want and like where are you now and how are you going to get there? And I was like, whoa, genius.
I'm
Um,
glad that landed.
yeah, it was really helpful. Annie, did you have a question?
Yeah, just a quick one for you, Christian. So, in all the work that you've been doing with businesses and the different benchmarking studies that you've done, what insights do you have in terms of what scale is needed in order to break even?
That's a really great question. I'd say it depends, of course, on what somebody wants. Because if you want to sell a really high-end product at a really small scale, it might work for you. But if you want to sell wholesale product, it's going to look very different. So it really depends on the species, I would say. I forget the exact number on the most recent kelp study we did, but basically it was a pretty linear graph showing that as the scale increased, so did the economies of scale and thus the profit. So I think I want to say it was almost all the farms over 75,000 pounds were profitable, but those under maybe half were. So that's one example. For oysters, I've seen it kind of all over the place between bottom planting versus a suspended culture, and selling direct to consumer or restaurant versus wholesale. Um, I do know from the benchmarking work, economies of scale were very clear in mussel farming and seaweed farming. But in oysters, there's just so much variability. That's really tough to say.
Thank you. We are at time right now, but I want to thank you again just for a great presentation and for being with us on this webinar today. And for anyone still here, just note that we do have another webinar that will be the third Friday of August, so that's August 16th. And we have the Maine Aquaculture Association that will be coming for that webinar to present on their work, including what Christian has talked about today, but also their work across the board. So we hope to see you then. And thank you all for coming. And thank you, Christian, especially. So round of
Yeah, thank you for
applause
the
to you,
invitation. I
sir.
really appreciate it.